47 minutes. That is the number you need to hold in your mind for everything that follows. Not 47 hours, not 47 days. 47 minutes between the moment the Iranian delegation pushed back their chairs, gathered their papers, and walked out of the back-channel negotiations that American diplomats had spent 6 days quietly, carefully, hopefully constructing, and the moment the first Iranian ballistic missile crossed into Israeli airspace over Tel Aviv. 47 minutes. And I need you to understand something right from the start before we go anywhere else with this story, because this is the detail that changes the entire meaning of everything that happened today. Those missiles were not scrambled in response to a failed negotiation. They were already on their launchers before the negotiation failed. The crews were already at their stations. The targeting data was already uploaded. The firing authorization was already written and waiting. Iran walked out of the room, and 47 minutes later, a barrage that had been prepared before the talks ever began was in the air heading toward Tel Aviv. That is not a response. That is a plan. And today, I am going to show you exactly what that plan was, what it means, and why the world you are living in tonight is fundamentally different from the world you woke up in this morning. Let me set the scene for you, because context is everything here, and I refuse to shortchange it. For 6 days, something genuinely rare had been happening in the diplomatic back channels of this conflict. The Sultanate of Oman, which has served as the primary intermediary between the United States and Iran in every significant diplomatic engagement between those two countries for the past 15 years, had been quietly facilitating talks, not public talks, not the kind of negotiations that get announced at press conferences with flags and handshakes, back-channel talks, the kind that happen in rooms that don't officially exist, between people whose presence is never confirmed, through intermediaries who specialize in the delicate, painstaking work of getting enemies to speak to each other without either side having to admit that's what they're doing. The Omani channel was used in the preliminary negotiations that produced the 2015 nuclear agreement. It was used in the prisoner exchange negotiations of 2023. It is the conduit through which Washington and Tehran communicate when they need to communicate and cannot be seen doing it. And for 6 days it had been active, focused, and, publicly at least, described as promising. American officials called it a genuine diplomatic opening. Israeli government statements described the back channel as evidence that the conflict was moving toward a resolution. The Security Cabinet, we were told, was committed to pursuing it. There was a word being used in briefings and press statements and carefully worded background conversations with journalists. The word was progress, and the people of Tel Aviv, a city that has been absorbing missile strikes for weeks, a city living under sustained attack, a city whose skyline has been changing in ways that no skyline should ever change. Those people woke up this morning knowing or believing or hoping that progress was being made, that the talks were real, that something might actually be shifting, that the nightmare might be approaching something resembling an end. At 11:14 this morning, the Iranian delegation walked out, and if you thought that was the shocking part, stay with me, because what happened in the 47 minutes that followed is where this story reveals its true nature. Within 47 minutes of that walkout, Iranian ballistic missiles were already crossing into Israeli airspace, not cruise missiles that take hours to arrive. Ballistic missiles, the kind that arc up into the edge of space and come down faster than almost anything humans have ever built, can intercept. And they were not alone. The barrage that hit Tel Aviv today was not a single weapon type launched from a single location in a moment of angry reaction. It was the most sophisticated, most carefully architected, most deliberately coordinated multi-weapon strike Iran has executed against a single target in this entire conflict. And I am going to take you through it piece by piece, because the composition of this barrage is not just a military story, it is a confession. It tells you exactly what Iran was doing during those 6 days of negotiations, and it tells you in a language that requires no translation whatsoever. 3 weapon categories, launched to arrive simultaneously. Let that land for a moment, because simultaneous arrival across 3 different weapon systems launched from multiple locations is not something you improvise in 47 minutes. It is not something you improvise in a day. Coordinating the flight times of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drone swarms so that they converge on the same target within the same defensive engagement window requires planning that is measured in days, not hours. The first category in today's barrage was the Khorramshahr-4 and Fateh-3 ballistic missiles, assigned to what Iran's military planners call hard infrastructure aim points, targets that previous strikes in this conflict have already hit and that Iran's battle damage assessment has identified as requiring follow-on strikes to complete their destruction. The Rafael facility at Haifa, struck previously, whose primary production line was destroyed but whose subsidiary infrastructure survived. IDF contingency command nodes that have been operating since the primary command infrastructure was darkened and that have been partially located through signals intelligence. The power grid restoration infrastructure working to bring emergency power back to districts that lost it in earlier strikes. All of those targets had Khorramshahr-4 or Fateh-3 assigned to them in today's barrage. This is not random. This is a sequel. A deliberate, methodical continuation of a destruction campaign that was always intended to have multiple chapters. The second category was the Zulfikar ballistic missile, and this is the part of the barrage that is hardest to describe in purely military terms, because the targets it was assigned are not military in any meaningful sense of the word. Distribution substations that have only been partially restored since earlier attacks. Water tanker staging areas, the emergency lifeline keeping people alive since the Rishon LeZion water plant was destroyed. Fuel depots keeping generator-dependent infrastructure running in a city that no longer has reliable grid power, hospitals, emergency services, the invisible scaffolding that a city under siege depends on to remain a city rather than a ruin. The Zulfikar missiles in today's barrage were not aimed at Israel's military capacity. They were aimed at Tel Aviv's ability to survive. That distinction matters. It matters enormously, and I want you to hold it. The third category was the Shahed 136 drone swarm, and I want to be precise about what role these drones were playing in today's barrage, because it is not the role most people assume. These drones are not the primary strike element. They are not designed to destroy hard targets. What they are designed to do, what they were specifically assigned to do today, is saturate, to overwhelm, to force the already depleted Iron Dome batteries, many of which have not been fully reloaded since the previous swarm attack, into an impossible choice. When ballistic warheads and drone swarms arrive at the same moment, defenders must decide in real time which threats to intercept and which to let through. The ballistic missiles are more destructive. The drones are more numerous. The batteries cannot handle both simultaneously at full capacity. Someone in some command center under enormous pressure in a very short window of time has to make a prioritization decision that will determine which parts of the city absorb impacts. That forced prioritization is not a side effect of this attack architecture. It is the point of it. Iran has been studying Israeli defensive responses for weeks, identifying the gaps, the reload timings, the engagement thresholds, and today's barrage was designed from the ground up to exploit precisely those vulnerabilities. This is not escalation in the crude sense of simply doing more of what was done before. This is optimization. This is a strike architecture that has been refined through accumulated observation of every previous attack's results. But stay with me, because the military architecture of this barrage, as alarming as it is not actually the most disturbing thing about today. The most disturbing thing is what 47 minutes tells you about the 6 days that preceded it. And this is the part where I need you to really pay attention, because this is where the story stops being about missiles and starts being about something much colder and much more calculated. The Omani back channel is not a casual diplomatic instrument. It requires preparation to activate. Iran agreed to participate. Iran sent a delegation. Iran sat across from intermediaries representing American diplomatic interests and engaged in 6 days of talks about the possibility of a ceasefire. And while that was happening, while American officials were reading Iran's participation as evidence of genuine interest in an off-ramp, while Israeli government spokespeople were calling it progress, while the people of Tel Aviv were allowing themselves the dangerous luxury of hope, Iranian military planners were finalizing targeting packages, coordinating multi-weapon simultaneous launch sequences, prepositioning cruise missile assets, staging Shahed 136 launch infrastructure across multiple locations. All of the preparation that a barrage of today's complexity and scale required before it could be executed was being completed during the negotiations. The negotiations did not delay the barrage. The negotiations enabled it. They provided the preparation window it required. Iran walked out when the preparation was complete. The 47 minutes between walkout and first missile in the air is not hesitation or reaction or even decision-making. It is the time required to transmit firing authorization to units that were already at stations, confirm final targeting data against targets already uploaded, and execute a coordinated launch sequence across multiple weapon systems simultaneously. 47 minutes is actually fast. It is fast because nothing was being prepared after the walkout. It was being executed. And if you think that revelation has finished reshaping how you understand today, I need to tell you that we are not done yet. Because there is one more dimension to this that we have not talked about yet, the human dimension. The dimension that exists not in targeting packages or weapon specifications, but in the streets of Tel Aviv on a morning when the people living there had every reason to believe the worst might be behind them. Stay with me, because the next part of this story is where it becomes something more than a military analysis. It becomes something that will stay with you. Here is part 2 of the script, written in Paul Giamatti's voice. There is a psychological dimension to what happened in Tel Aviv this morning that military analysis almost always fails to capture, and I think it is the most important dimension of all, so I want to spend real time on it. Because the missiles that hit Tel Aviv today did not just hit a city, they hit a specific emotional and behavioral state that 6 days of diplomatic signaling had deliberately created. And understanding that requires understanding something true and deeply human about what sustained threat does to people over time. A civilian population living under prolonged missile attack cannot maintain peak alertness indefinitely. This is not weakness. This is not carelessness. It is one of the most well-documented phenomena in the entire field of human psychology under stress. Sustained hypervigilance, the constant, exhausting, full-body state of readiness that comes from knowing an attack could come at any moment, is simply not something the human nervous system can sustain without relief. It costs something enormous. It depletes people in ways that are invisible until they are not. And so populations under sustained attack develop coping mechanisms, rhythms, ways of managing the unbearable by parceling it out into survivable increments. They learn when the threat feels higher and when it feels lower. They adjust their behavior accordingly. They find the edges of the danger and they live as close to normal as those edges permit, because the alternative, complete paralysis, complete suspension of every ordinary human activity, is its own kind of destruction. Now add 6 days of genuine, publicly acknowledged, government-confirmed negotiations. Add official statements about progress. Add the specific, intoxicating, dangerous word ceasefire entering the public conversation not as a distant hope, but as an active diplomatic pursuit. What that does to a population already depleted by weeks of sustained attack is not difficult to understand. It eases something. Not completely. not recklessly, but involuntarily, the way tension releases from a muscle when the thing you have been bracing against appears to be receding. People in Tel Aviv this morning were moving differently than they had been moving a week ago. More of them were outside. More were in cafes attempting to reclaim some fragment of ordinary life. More were commuting, shopping, moving through the city in patterns that had been suppressed during the peak threat periods of the past weeks. Not because they were foolish, because they were human, because 6 days of diplomatic signaling had shifted, however slightly, the behavioral calculus of an entire city. At 11:14 in the morning, the Iranian delegation walked out. 47 minutes later, the first missile arrived. And I want you to hold the specific cruelty of that timing because it is not accidental. Night strikes find people in their homes, where reinforced rooms and shelter access are immediately available. Daytime strikes find people dispersed, on streets, in transit, in open areas, between locations rather than within them. The 30 to 60-second window between siren and impact is survivable indoors. It is far less survivable in open urban movement, in the middle of a commute, at an outdoor table, halfway between a shelter and wherever you were going when the alarm sounded. The barrage arrived at midday in broad daylight, after 6 days during which the population had been gently, incrementally, involuntarily encouraged to relax its shelter discipline. The casualty profile from today's attack will differ from previous strikes. Not necessarily higher in total numbers, but different in composition. More people caught in public spaces, more people in transit, more people who were outside because the morning had felt, for the first time in weeks, like a morning that might be safe. That is what Iran engineered. Not just the physical destruction. The specific human context in which the physical destruction would land with maximum psychological weight. A city that woke up expecting progress toward peace, absorbing the most complex, most coordinated attack of the entire conflict. The contrast is not incidental, it is the message. And if you think the international dimension of this is simply a matter of diplomatic embarrassment, stay with me, because what is unfolding in the hours after this strike, in the corridors of power in Washington, in Muscat, in Jerusalem, and in every capital that has been watching this conflict is something with consequences that will outlast the smoke rising over Tel Aviv's central business district by years, possibly by decades. Start with Oman. The Sultanate of Oman has built its regional influence, its diplomatic value, its carefully cultivated identity as a neutral intermediary on a single foundational premise, that when Oman facilitates a channel, that channel is real, that the parties using it are engaging in good faith, or at minimum, are not using it as operational cover for military strikes. That premise has now been shattered in the most public and devastating way imaginable. Oman did not just facilitate a failed negotiation today. Oman was used. Its diplomatic infrastructure, its credibility, its name, and its flag were incorporated into an Iranian military preparation operation without its knowledge. The Omani government has already framed the attack as a betrayal of the diplomatic framework it supported. But the damage goes deeper than that statement can capture. Every future attempt to use the Omani Channel, by anyone for any purpose, will now carry the memory of today. The question that will never fully go away: is this real, or is this preparation? That question, once planted, never fully leaves the room. Now consider Washington. For American intelligence services, the 47-minute window is not a political problem. It is a professional one. It means that the intelligence assessment that treated Iran's participation in the Omani Channel as evidence of genuine interest in de-escalation was wrong. Not partially wrong, fundamentally wrong in its most basic interpretive conclusion. The negotiations were not a diplomatic effort that failed. They were an operational cover that succeeded. 6 days of talks provided time to finalize targeting packages, position assets, and stage launch systems. And during those 6 days, something else was happening that the intelligence community is now urgently and uncomfortably examining. Information was flowing. American negotiators communicating through Omani intermediaries were, with the best intentions and in what they believed was a genuine peace process, conveying information about Israeli defensive postures, about American red lines, about the thresholds and conditions under which a ceasefire might be acceptable. All of that data, every signal about what Washington would and would not tolerate, every indication of where Israeli defenses were stressed and where they were holding, was being received by a delegation that was simultaneously coordinating a missile barrage. The question haunting every intelligence review being conducted right now is not just what was said, it is what was learned, what vulnerabilities were revealed, what thresholds were identified, what was extracted from 6 days of good faith engagement by a party that was never engaging in good faith at all. And in Jerusalem, the political consequences are severe in a way that cuts in every direction at once, leaving no one standing on solid ground. The government presented the Omani negotiations as a genuine opportunity. Ministers made public statements. The Security Cabinet expressed commitment to the diplomatic track. The population was told implicitly and explicitly that progress was being made. The barrage that followed does not just contradict that narrative, it demolishes it and then hits the rubble with a follow-on strike. Both political factions in Israel are now exposed in ways from which neither can easily recover. Those who advocated for the negotiation track must explain how 6 days of talks produced not a ceasefire, but the largest single coordinated missile attack of the war. Those who advocated for escalation and opposed the negotiation approach must explain how the restraint required to pursue diplomacy created the preparation window that made today's barrage possible. There is no position from which today looks like a vindication. There is only the shared wreckage of a political moment in which everyone was wrong about something that mattered enormously. But the deepest question, the one that sits underneath all of the tactical and political and intelligence analysis, the one that this entire day has forced into the open in a way that cannot be walked back, is the simplest and the most devastating. Is a negotiated end to this conflict actually possible? Not a pause. Not a tactical delay dressed up in diplomatic language, a genuine, durable cessation of hostilities. The 47-minute window answers that question with a clarity that is almost unbearable in its directness. A party that intends to end a conflict does not spend 6 days of negotiations finalizing targeting packages. It does not stage missiles, coordinate multi-weapon launch sequences, pre-position cruise missile assets, and prepare drone swarm infrastructure while sitting across from intermediaries discussing peace terms. Those actions and that intention are not compatible. They do not exist in the same strategic universe. A party that does all of those things and then launches within 47 minutes of walking out of the room was never in that room to end anything. It was in that room to prepare the next phase, and the next phase is what is unfolding right now. Smoke rising over Tel Aviv's central business district, smoke rising over the port, smoke rising over residential neighborhoods in parts of the city that previous strikes had not reached, a city that was told progress was coming, absorbing the proof that it was not. I want to leave you with something that I think matters beyond the immediate horror of today's events, because history has a way of turning on moments like this one, and I think it is worth saying out loud what this moment actually is. What we witness today is what happens when diplomacy is treated not as a path to peace, but as a tool of war. When the architecture of negotiation, the intermediaries, the back channels, the carefully constructed frameworks that take years to build and seconds to destroy, is weaponized by one party as preparation time rather than engaged with as a genuine search for resolution. The damage done today is not only physical. The buildings that were hit can eventually be rebuilt. The defensive batteries that were depleted can eventually be reloaded. The infrastructure that was destroyed can eventually be restored. What cannot be easily rebuilt is the basic premise that when parties agree to talk, the talking is real. That premise is the foundation not just of this conflict's potential resolution, but of every diplomatic effort that will follow it in this region and beyond. When that premise is shattered, when it is demonstrated publicly